Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. We're going to continue our reading and discussion of the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart, Book 2 of the series, subtitled Antichrist is a Woman, Alive and Well Again, speaking specifically about the Roman Catholic Church. This book is authored, this two-volume series is authored by P.D. Stewart. You can get it at luxverbi.org or any other fine bookstore in the United States, and I highly encourage and recommend that my listeners get these books. A veritable college education in what ails the world today, the source of all of our troubles, and that of generations of Christians before us. Speaking about the Roman Catholic Church, and we're focusing on the rank idolatry and demon worship of the Roman Catholic Church through her idols and dead bodies and bones and other articles of worship, which is forbidden in the Scriptures. Yesterday we read a lengthy list of relics that the Roman Catholic Church champions. And it's an exhaustive list, but yet barely scratching the surface, we can be sure, by the words of some of these contributors. We'll begin now with the last paragraph on page 277, where we left off yesterday at the end of the broadcast. Now, after presenting this lengthy list of all these ghastly items that are kept by the Roman Catholic Church and regarded as holy relics, the author says, but the pearl of the entire collection are, quote, several vials of the Holy Virgin's milk. And will you doubt it? A small roll of butter and a little piece of cheese made from her milk, unquote. Good grief, reader. Here is a lying wonder, if there ever was one. How can any intelligent, rational Roman Catholic believe these things? Are you not all ashamed of yourselves and your creed? In the language of Shakespeare, quote, O judgment, thou hast fled to brutish beasts, for men have lost their reason, unquote. Said Van Dyke, here we find, quote, what is enough to make one shudder with horror as he contemplates the abyss of superstition into which papists have fallen, unquote. As Watson commented, quote, there isn't a monstrosity of belief or practice that has been voluntarily abandoned, unquote. Again, I ask, can you believe it? That such dark age absurdities, such as necromancy, such rank, crass impostures, still taught and believed even to this day in the Church of Rome. One can only marvel at, no, pity, the Roman Catholic on the Supreme Court of America, in Congress, or other positions of high esteem, who, despite their intelligence and great learning, are still so impervious to logic or common sense on the subject of their religion. Well may such Catholics submit to being blindfolded and carried on a tightrope across the Niagara Falls. Yes, in this day of great enlightenment, when the wonderful submarine cruises the ocean depths and the metal bird flies over the highest peaks, the papists still place crosses upon their churches, upon their altars, and upon their garments. Everywhere is seen the insignia of the cross. Everywhere it is outwardly honored and exalted, and other relics besides, while the teachings of Christ are buried beneath a mass of senseless traditions, false interpretations, and rigorous exactions, unquote. The Savior's words concerning the people of his day apply still greater force to the Catholics of today. Quote, In vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 19. Reader, the worship of images and relics, the invocation of saints, are devices of Satan to attract the minds of the people from God and from his Son, and to direct their attention to Mary, dead saints, and the bones of Saint Lucy, Saint Basil, and Saint so-and-so. On page 43 of his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, former Roman Catholic priest Charles Chinnicky writes honestly, quote, though my intelligence often revolted against the fables with which I was nurtured, I yet forced myself to accept them as gospel truths. Unquote. Is this not true of every Roman Catholic who is forced to believe these things? But as one author wrote, quote, this outward splendor, pomp, and ceremony, relic worship, and the ritualism of Roman Catholicism only mocks the longings of the sin-sick soul and is an evidence of its inward corruption. Unquote. Now, chapter 42 of the book is entitled Bones, a Holy Influence. The author says, with what reference the Catholics pay their bones. Says R. Southey, quote, the bodies of their saints are even now exposed in their churches, some dried and shriveled, others reduced to a skeleton, clothed either in religious habits or in the most gorgeous garments, a spectacle as ghastly as the superstition itself is degrading, unquote. In some churches, some Roman Catholic churches, quote, the poor fragments of mortality, a skull, a bone, or a fragment of a bone, a tooth or a tongue, were and are either mounted or set according to their size in gold and silver, deposited in costliest shrines and the finest workmanship, and enriched with the most precious gems, unquote. This love of bones and relics began early in the life of the Roman Catholic Church. The source of most of these bones, quote, the catacombs at Rome were at first an inexhaustible mine of relics. But the hugest fraud of this kind that is ever practiced was when the contents of a whole cemetery were brought forth as the bones of 11,000 British virgins, all bound from Cornwall, to be married in Amorica, carried by tempest up the Rhine to the city of Cologne, and there martyred by an army of Huns under Attila. Even this legend obtained credit. All parts of Christendom were eager to acquire a portion of the relics. At this day, a church may be seen in Cologne literally lined with the bones, unquote. Johann Heinrich Kurtz comments on the history of this Catholic love affair with bones, quote, nothing could equal the zeal with which their dead saints' bones were searched out, or the enthusiasm with which men gazed on them, or pressed forward to touch them. Every province, nay, every town, had its tutelary saint. In the East, the invocation of saints originated with three great Cappadocians. In the West with Ambrosius, and he continues, he says, Catholics say that they do not worship these statues, these images and relics. Then why do they, by lighting before statues and relics, by lighting before them tapers, kissing them, bowing, prostrating, and burning incense before them? Quote, the position of the Church of Rome in relation to martyr and relic worship has been fixed since the decree of the Council of Trent in its favor. This is the foundation of the Catholic doctrine, says James Morrison. Indeed, one Catholic writer goes to pains to point out that the worship of bones is biblical. Arinji argues for this practice in the Roma Subterranea and seeks to advance spiritual examples which he says establish the miraculous power of the relics of saints. For instance, the bones of Joseph are said to have prophesied. In the case of the dead man who was revived by coming in contact with the bones of Elijah, recorded in 2 Kings 13, unquote. What gross incredulity! Reader, as I will show, the honoring and collecting of bones is a form of necromancy, the worship of the dead. In Chapter 4 of the aforementioned book, What I Saw in Rome by John F. Coulthard, he writes of what he saw when he visited Rome. Quote, Bones and Holiness is the subtitle of this portion, and it says, bones seem to have quite a hallowing influence according to the theology of Rome. The Pantheon, once a temple for sun worship, with its great 30-foot hole in the roof through which the sun's rays shone during worship, was consecrated and became a Catholic church simply by bringing in 28 cartloads of bones from the catacombs and burying them beneath the floor. Unquote. Again, more evidence that Roman Catholicism is just baptized paganism. The author continues, he says, in another excerpt from the same chapter, Coulthard recounts that what he saw under the shadow of the Vatican, inside the Church of the Capuchin Fathers, near the Piazza Barberini, at the beginning of the Via Vittoria Veneto. Quote, I set out one day to see some of the wonders of papal Rome. What bones and skulls and relics of all kinds were brought out. On the north side of the Piazza Barberini, at the beginning of the Via Vittoria Veneto, is the Church of the Capuchin Fathers. The little booklet one buys at the church assures us that here in this underground church cemetery, we are about to see a, quote, unique work of art that will invite to prayer and meditation, unquote. And what do we see when we arrive? We see a long underground passage divided into 6 arched compartments, and the whole place stacked to the ceiling with bones. On the ground are great heaps of skulls, while on the walls and the ceilings, laid out in all kinds of artistic compartments, and the whole place stacked with bones, etc. What a sight! Here and there skeletons have been wired together and clothed with monkish habit. The guidebook assures us that the bones of 4,000 priests of that order, that is the Capuchin order, who died between 1528 and 1870, are piled up here in heaps on the floor or arranged in the strange designs on the walls and the ceilings. And then it gives color photographs of the interior of what looks for all the world to be a pagan crypt. And if one is familiar with the old ancient fruit cellars that we used to have here in the Midwest to store garden goods during the wintertime, you'll recall the arched cemented ceilings and the walls and the moist, dank, and stale air that was inside. Well, that's what the inside of this cathedral looks like, this necropolis, this mortuary for all intents and purposes, and all the walls, the ceilings, even a chandelier made of the remnants of these dead monks. It's ghastly. And here beneath this color photograph of the interior of this crypt, it said, morbid taste for bones. Roman Catholic crypt cemetery at a church in Rome dedicated to the Virgin Mary and run by the Capuchin monks. The crypt is decorated with the bones of 4,000 deceased monks of the fraternity. Even the lamps in the narrow walkway leading to this miniature necropolis are made of friars' bones. Now continuing, he says, can you believe it, reader? These monks, instead of burying the last remains of their deceased confreres, took the dead monk's bones and decorated the crypt with them. How could any sane person care to look upon such a ghastly array of skulls and bones with their crimson ornamented robes covering their dried up bones? To adopt the words of Henry Mills Alden, quote, bones are used as mosaics, making the queerest of caricatures in the chamber of the dead. The walls of this gloomy sepulchre are adorned with the deathly figures, wrought with the bones of monks, who are thus made to contribute to the embellishment of the place after they are picked to pieces. The mummy of monks, with cowl and cassock on, the cord confining his gown, the cross still held in the skeleton's hand, an extraordinary museum in the court of death, unquote. In other instances, writes Eliakim Littell, quote, when a monk dies, his body is put into a separate chamber until it decomposes. The skeleton is then taken to pieces, and the bones are arrayed in fanciful and horrid symmetry. The skulls in one pile, the thigh bones in another, the ribs in another, unquote. Said Alden, quote, long ago in Egypt they filled their tombs with the mummies, and now when a Capuchin monk dies, he can find a bed below only by crowding out the one who has been there the longest, unquote. O reader, the wonders of Roman Catholicism. And here, one might say, the horrors of Roman Catholicism, and it's accompanied by a color photograph of a skull and bones decorated with flowers and wearing a crown of flowers. The caption under the morbid photograph says, decorated skull in a Romish shrine. Sticks and stones, roots and bones, witchcraft is alive and well in the Roman Catholic Church. Yes, the author calls the worship of relics witchcraft. And if anyone reads an authoritative book on witchcraft, you'll see that it has common pagan roots. To quote John Coulthard again from What I Saw in Rome, quote, Rome finds no difficulty at all in explaining almost any miracle. A friend of mine who had already been shown over to St. Peter's Cathedral and assured by the priest that the body of St. Peter lay in the crypt was visiting yet another church the same day. Here the monks displayed a skull for his inspection and told him he was looking at the head of the great St. Peter. My friend asked how that could be, since he had already been assured that Peter lay in the great basilica, and how then could Peter have two heads? He was solemnly told that since this was just a small skull, it was the head of St. Peter when he was just a boy. It is difficult for us in this enlightened land to understand how people will believe such ridiculous fables, but millions in Italy and Spain and other parts of the world still do, unquote. Can you believe it? The head of St. Peter as a boy in the Church of the Capuchin Fathers, and his head as a man in St. Peter's Basilica at the same time? Who knows how many other quote-unquote genuine bones and relics of the saints, and how many pieces of wood from the cross of Christ are preserved by the faithful monks and the priests of Rome. And another color photograph in this book, a morbid creation that looks for all the world like a monstrance, made of body parts, bones, skulls, vertebrae, femurs, and coccyx, and a skull. all arranged to look like that instrument through which the Roman Catholic Church worships their God of bread, the Eucharist. And underneath is the caption, "For the love of bones, monks make an intricate artwork of skulls and femurs," and other artistic renditions in relief of angels worshiping a dead man's skull, and for all the world, a representation of the infant Christ with a trumpet to his mouth, sitting on a pile of skulls with a skull in his lap. It's from a church in Rome, and it says, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." Now the author is going to talk about necropolises, or necropoli, or the temples of the dead. He says, in the Roman Catholic Church, the dead are honored in the bones of saints and dead popes. Certain of her dead are interred within the walls of her churches, cathedrals, and basilicas. But why? Because the cult of the saints dictate that certain dead are venerated in their actual place of burial, and thus it is most convenient and practical, from Rome's point of view, to have these saints in known locations to support the practice and the lucrative trade that follows from it. The vaults and floors of the Vatican are filled with the bones and tombs of the dead, which is why they have graveyards in the grounds of their churches, a practice adopted even by the Church of England and other Protestant churches who continued many other pagan practices of Rome. Yes, an appropriate admonition from this author to the Protestant and evangelical churches for maintaining some of these pagan roots of Roman Catholicism in their worship. We must purge our house. Now, even when we look inside the great Catholic cathedrals of the world, they are all built on ancient pagan grave sites. The Vatican itself is built on the site of an ancient pagan temple. In 1954, the tomb of the sun god Helios, from which we get the symbol of the halo, was discovered beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Mr. Murphy, the editor of the celebrated work on the convent of Batalha in Portugal, comments as follows, quote, "The pyramids of the Egyptians are tombs, and so the dead are buried in churches, and on their towers are pyramidal forms." And he gives pictures of these pyramidal forms. Today, Protestants all over this country would call them steeples. And he continues, he says, "Consequently, the pyramids of the towers indicate that there are graves in the churches. And as the pyramidal form constitutes the essence of the pointed arch style, and the pyramids of the towers are imitations of the Egyptian pyramids, the pointed arch is derived from the latter," unquote. We do not suppose the reader can have any objection to such a set of syllogisms as above. That's right, you'll find no Christian origin of what we today in the Protestant churches call steeples. It comes directly and exclusively from paganism. Now they call it Christianity. And you have to wonder what goes through God's mind when he looks down and sees a house of worship topped with an Egyptian pyramid. Now, in the book, speaking of these pyramidal-shaped objects that are found upon all the churches and cathedrals, both Protestant and Catholic and even pagan, since that's where they originate, denote that the structure under which they are erected are sepulchres, tombs. This is not an appropriate thing for a house of God. Why do we not ask the question, what is a steeple? What does it represent? And then not take the first answer, but do the research and come up with the truth about these pagan symbols that top all of our so-called religious structures in this country, and demand that they be removed. A steeple has no Christian origin. It comes directly from paganism. It comes from ancient Egypt, where a pyramid structure like this was used to denote a sepulcher under which were dead men's bones. No excuse for this. And hand drawings of sections of these cathedrals showing their outline, their floor plans. And they're built like coffins. Their floor plans look like coffins. Yet we never ask the question, why are churches built in such a uniform way around the world? Even a picture of St. Peter's Basilica. Everyone recognizes the dome, but few take notice of the pyramid that is perched upon its top, under which is a grave, supposedly of St. Peter. It's a crypt, a necropolis. It's full of dead men's bones. Thus, the pyramid structure at the top. Now, the author continues, he says, no cathedral, no Roman Catholic cathedral, and one might often say even the Protestant cathedrals that we're so familiar with in England, no cathedral may be built without containing dead bodies and graves. Cathedrals are built in the shape of a coffin. A cathedral is in reality a graveyard or a mortuary. When you walk inside the cathedrals, down the long corridors or passages between the giant pillars on the sides, you will find that they are in fact walking on the bodies of men. The dead are buried underneath the floors of the passages. And more floor plans and interior photographs of these mortuaries called churches and cathedrals. In closing this aspect of our examination of the architecture of the Roman Catholic churches and cathedrals around the world, it is most curious to note that the Catholic Mass cannot be said in any of these churches without there being a bone of a dead saint under the altar. Why? Because according to the belief, you cannot find access to God without the intercession of a great dead person. For this reason, under all the altars of these cathedrals, or in the basement, you will find either a coffin or a tomb with the bones or relics of some dead king, queen, stately person, or a quote-unquote saint. The Catholic Church even claims to have the arm of John the Baptist in one of its cathedrals in Istanbul. This is the veneration of the dead, what the Bible terms necromancy, and an abomination. Clemens Alexandrinus speaks thus of this form of demon worship, quote, the more skillful theologists place the coffins of the deceased in many of their temples, so their temples are nothing else but the sepulchres of dead men, unquote. And says Mead, the expert on this subject, quote, they were indeed called by the specious and plausible name of temples, but were in truth nothing but sepulchres. That is, the very sepulchres of dead men were called temples, unquote. He goes on to rebuke these worshippers in these terms, quote, be ye therefore at length persuaded to forget and relinquish your demon worship, and be ashamed to worship the sepulchres of dead men, unquote. Thus, as we have demonstrated, all the famous temples, basilicas, triumphal arches, columns, and other pompous structures and erections of the Church of Rome are after the pious example of the Egyptians. The Romish Church even calls its most famous basilica, St. Peter's, the tomb of St. Peter, and has a book called The Guide to St. Peter's Tomb, or Necropolis of St. Peter, referring to the said basilica. Now, what is a necropolis? The term necropolis comes from the Greek for city of the dead, and in ancient times a necropolis was a sort of affluent cemetery. So, for example, the Etruscans built necropoli as a place to worship their dead, and the Egyptian necropoli were in the form of a complex of pyramids that housed the wealthy dead along with their servants and any supplies and personal effects that would be needed for their journey into the afterlife. Reader, we're talking here about necromancy, spirit, or ancestor worship, using the bones of witchcraft. And he gives a reference. See, for example, Raven Grimassi in his Encyclopedia of Wicca and Witchcraft, 2nd edition, published by Llewellyn Publications in 2000, page 60, and you'll find this same practice is used in witchcraft. There's no difference. It has the same roots. But still worse, says the author, is the fact, as King observes, quote, relic worship became, after the 3rd century, the chief form of Catholic Christianity throughout the world, which finds its parallel in the fact that a fragment of a bone of a Buddha, that is, a holy man in whom the deity had dwelt during his life, is actually indispensable for the consecration of a Dagobah, or temple of that religion, equally as similar particle of saintliness as a sine qua non for the setting up of a Roman Catholic altar, unquote. You see the common roots? It's even practiced in the Buddhist religion. It's not Christianity. There's no example in the Bible of this. In view of all the above, I have one observation, or rather question. How, reader, does an intelligent, self-respecting individual bring him or herself to believe that there is any virtue or divinity in relics, bones, or images, or to put any trust or confidence in them, or to give them a religious honor and respect, or worse, to adore with divine honor, as do the Roman Catholics, of old rags, or their shrines, or their nasty, rotten bones of Saint so-and-so, or believe that any of this can effect cures and miracles? Heed the words of Plato, my Roman Catholic friends, and, quote, forget and relinquish your demon worship, and be ashamed to worship at the sepulchres of dead men, unquote. Heed the voice of the angel of Revelation chapter 18, who cried out against this mystery Babylon, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, demons, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hateful bird. Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. Do you not see that the temples of your churches are indeed nothing else but the sepulchres of dead men, given the specious and plausible name of temples, but are in truth nothing but sepulchres? Reader, do you not see why I said in the opening chapter of this volume that notwithstanding that we live in an age of colored photography, of the talking machine, of the electric light, of the motor car and the airship and the printing press, and of the moving picture, superstition is still seated upon her ancient throne, and the cowl of the monk on her head, and the silly gibberish of the Dark Ages on her tongue. Paganism, reader, is still in full bloom, and you'll find those blooms no more colorfully displayed than in the Roman Catholic Church. We must now leave the dunghill of relics and bones and church sepulchres and proceed yet to another mystery. And this, the next chapter, chapter 43, is entitled The Empire of Mary. It begins with a quote from one of the master occultists of our time, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky of 1919. She says, O Virgin Mary, conceived without sin, was at first deemed a blasphemous heresy by the Orthodox Fathers. Even Blavatsky recognized the blasphemous heresy of the cult of the Virgin Mary. Now, the author says, before the pagan goddess Isis, also known as Ishtar, Ayana, Semiramis, Diana, etc., was metamorphosed by Roman Catholicism into the Virgin Mary. She was worshipped as the quote-unquote morning star, the Mother of God, the hope of mankind, the Queen of Heaven, the faithful mediatrix, the gate of heaven, all niche titles allotted by the Greeks to the goddess Diana, also known as Aphrodite, whom the Ephesians called Mother of All. And so when Pope Pius died, he was certain to be made a saint very soon after on account of his great veneration for Mary. It is said that no previous pope had done more for the cause of Mariolatry than Pope Pius. But it was only as recently as 1950 that Pius discovered Mary had been taken in bodily form to heaven, and on that discovery he pronounced the dogma of the, quote, bodily assumption of the Virgin Mary, unquote. Mary is now the presiding genii in the Catholic pantheon of saints and the Cassandra prophetess of the Romish Church. Said Pope Leo XIII, quote, although the Holy Virgin no longer commands her Son, yet her prayers, being the prayers of a mother, never meet of refusal, unquote. And, quote-unquote, Saint Peter Damian declares, quote, all power, O Mary, has been given you in heaven and on earth. Nothing is impossible to you, for you can give hope to the desponding, unquote. When Mary, he continues, quote, presents herself before Jesus, the altar of reconciliation, to mediate for us, she rather seems to dictate than to supplicate, and has more the air of a queen than a subject. Quote, and it gives it the phrase in Latin, which means all is subject to Mary's empire, even God himself, unquote. What nerve these Roman Catholic priests have. Hence, from infancy, all Catholics are taught that Mary is the Mother of God, and that they should pray many times every day to her, saying, quote, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me, unquote. The Catholic Church has this prayer in adoration of Mary. Quote, rejoice, O my soul, for the prospect Mary's intercession affords thee of being saved. Powerful Queen, from how many perils have you not delivered me? How many lights and graces have you not obtained me? How have I deserved that you should labor so ardently for my salvation? And if in return for your gifts I gave my blood and life, it would be nothing. I can only offer you the weak tribute of my praise and love. Deign, most amiable Virgin, graciously to accept it. Amen. Unquote. We read the following in a passage from the Glories of Mary by St. Alphonse de Liguori. Quote, St. Bernardine of Siena does not fear to advance at all. Even God himself is subject to the empire of Mary. God hears Mary's prayers as if they were commands. Jesus has rendered Mary omnipotent. The one is omnipotent by nature, the other is omnipotent by grace, unquote. Quoting further, the Lord, O Mary, says St. Anselm, has so exalted you that his favor has rendered you omnipotent. Yes, says Richard of St. Laurent, Mary is omnipotent, for according to all laws, the queen enjoys the same privileges as the king, and that power may be equal between son and the mother, unquote. One would have thought that God could not be brought any lower than this lowest deep, but again, in the same book, The Glories of Mary, we find the following, quote, God himself has been conformed to her will, unquote. This so-called Saint Liguori adds, quote, we can say of Mary on earth that the Lamb, Jesus, followed her. And I will just interject a famous, almost cliche nursery rhyme, so familiar to all of us, yet none of us recognize the mind-numbing perversion of it. Listen carefully with a spiritual ear in the context of what we're studying in this book. Mary had a little lamb. His fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. We've been indoctrinated with Catholicism, even in our cribs, by the most trusted people in our lives, our parents. The author continues, the Jesuit authors Stanislaus Hogan and Donaldus McIntosh, Society of Jesus, their Jesuit priest, confirmed this doctrine of the Church is still approved. Quote, we have said that more than one sovereign pontiff has approved of this doctrine. We should have said that several popes have emphatically taught it. Benedict XIV calls Mary, quote, the heavenly canal by which all graces and all gifts come to us, unquote. In his encyclical on the Jubilee of the Immaculate Conception, the late Pope Pius X styles Our Lady, quote, the supreme ministrant in the distribution of grace, unquote, says Hogan and McIntosh. And Pope Leo XIII makes St. Bernardine of Siena's words his own when he says that, quote, every grace which is bestowed upon man comes to him by three perfectly ordered degrees. God communicates the grace to Christ. From Christ it passes to the Holy Virgin. We receive it from Mary, Mary's own hands, unquote. But in Matthew chapter 12, verse 46 through 50, we read that Jesus, quote, placed not only his disciples, but also the common people above his mother. One day while he was preaching to the people, his mother and his brethren stood without, desiring to speak with him. They sent someone in to bid him to come out to her, but Jesus said, quote, who is my mother? And pointed to his disciples. He said, quote, they were his mother and brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father, which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother, unquote. The Gospel of Luke records it this way, quote, my mother and my brethren are these, the disciples which hear the word of God and do it, unquote. But it may distress my Catholic friends even more to learn that in their own Treatise on Faith and Creed by St. Augustine, chapter 4, section 9, are found these words, quote, the Lord said, woman, what have I to do with thee? John chapter 19 and verse 4. When the Lord said, woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. he gave us to understand that he, as being God, he had no mother. Unquote. That from Roman Catholic Saint Augustine of Hippo in his own published works, still venerated by the Roman Catholic Church. They have the truth, yet they reject it and teach heresy. Now the author continues, he says, Reader, St. Augustine is the greatest of all the church fathers in the Church of Rome and the most august bishop of Hippo. And he tells us that it is not a teaching of Scripture that Mary is the quote-unquote mother of God. Moreover, it was Augustine who said that Acts chapter 2 verse 20 tells us clearly, quote, there is none other name given among men whereby we must be saved, except the name of Jesus. Augustine says, Jesus himself said to all sinners, come unto me. He never said, go to Mary, my mother. The ancient Mirabilia, after telling how Agrippa had a dream in which Cybele, the mother of the gods, appeared to him, says, quote, when he returned to Rome, he built this temple and made it to be dedicated to the honor of Cybele, mother of the gods, unquote. Likewise, the ancient Babylonians worshipped their dead queen Semiramis, or Semiramis, as many pronounce it, and called her Mother of the Gods, the Queen of Heaven. As I explained in Book 1, the name Barbelon, translated into English as Babylon, comes from the word barbelo, the Greek, for the first emanation of the Supreme Being, otherwise known as the Mother of the Eons. She was referred to by the pagans as Isis, Queen of Heaven, Ennoia, the womb of the world and the Mother of God, all of which are pedigrees of the same pagan deity. The Gnostics and pagans regarded this entity as the emanation of the first cause, the creative principle who in turn created the entire manifest world, the ineffable parent, as they call it. And the sorcerer Simon Magus equated the Ennoia with Sophia, the co-creatrix. Do you see what's coming from the Roman Catholic Church? The co-creatrix. It is curious, therefore, that today the Roman Catholic Church calls Mary Queen of Heaven, co-redemptrix, and co-creatrix of the universe. Simon Magus taught that in Ennoia, that is, Sophia, Isis, Mary, call her whatever you will, was the action of the Father Creator manifesting through the Son, hence her title, Barbelo, the mother of all occult systems of religion. And that she will be the basis and the justification for this new world religion called the New World Order.